Aren't showing up just as of yet. So, could both of you talk just to make sure that I have your levels right?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect. How about you,
Yeah.
Federico? Perfect.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Great.
Right.
All right. Well, welcome. Welcome to both Robo. You've been here before, just on a different side of the microphone now, and Frederico. Well, Robo is on the review committee for the grants program, and Frederico is with Reverie. Welcome. As everyone knows, I am Tog. I'm part of the OSL hosting today. And let's get started. So, Frederico, why don't we start with you? How did you fall into the Cosmos ecosystem / osmosis? And also, what's your kind of origin story with Reverie?
Yeah, sure. Happy to give some background there. So I joined Reverie almost 2 years ago. Now when I was first, like, I'd been learning about the crypto ecosystem and stuff for a few years now, but I specifically encountered Reverie when I was still in college. Actually, I was doing a lot of research, specifically like getting involved with DAOs and their community, like in a lot of discords and trying to contribute more actively. And like the way I found Reverie, actually, I wrote an article for this media DAO called Forefront and got published on Twitter, and then got to meet some of the Reverie guys, and like they told me how they were working a lot with DAOs as operators and through governance, so decided to join them, and yeah, stuck with them since then. And specifically with Osmosis, I think we decided to get involved. Like some members of Reverie already like knew like some people on the Osmosis team and the community. And I remember a couple of months after Osmosis was started, we had some calls to discuss how we could get involved and how we could basically start a grants program to help them distribute funds and grow the protocol and the ecosystem. And yeah, so we did some more research ourselves and decided to get involved and structure the whole proposal. I think it was published in early 2022 and it passed on chain for the first time in April 2022. So that's the point. We got the initial funds to start running the grants program for 6 months, and then it was renewed back in December for an additional 12 months.
Right. Amazing. So that's basically what the relationship, my next question would be the relationship between the Osmosis Grant Program and Reverie. Essentially, you're the facilitator of the program, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Like we don't hold any of the funds and don't sit on the multisig or anything. What we do is before anything happens on chain, we evaluate applicants and have a bunch of steps before deciding which grants to give out, and then basically provide recommendations to the multisig. Right?
Cool. That actually just brings me into Robo a little bit, as Robo is part of that committee. And Robo, who are you? Do people know you or not? And what you doing here talking about grants?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Robo. I've been involved with the osmosis community since before the Genesis block. Just got involved in the Discord and, you know, got, I was doing moderation there. I was one of the original members of the OSL, and have since stepped away from the OSL, but uh, about, I think it would have been 6 months ago, I was approached by Reverie to join the second iteration of the review committee for the grants program. There was an initial multi-sig that had, I believe, a couple members of the foundation on it, and I think the goal there was to kind of decentralize that a bit more and get the foundation members off of the multi-sig. So I was one of the members that filled one of those empty seats, and now I sit on the review committee and help Reverie with various grants things when possible.
Nice. That's actually really, really amazing. I wanted to bring you guys on here today to basically give us the too long but still reading version of what goes through with the grants process. Robo, we have a couple of notes that we wrote down that Robo looked through and helped me with, as he's more intimately knowledgeable with the process than I am. So, one of the first things that I kind of want to ask, and whoever wants to pick this up first, go right ahead. But what's kind of the first step from your side? So, say someone submits a grant proposal. Who reads it first? What's the process to read through it? And kind of what's the timeline to start work on seeing if it's something that you guys want to fund or not?
Sure, I can take that. So yeah, even before, so there are two types of ways we get applications. There's inbound applications, which is they're just people going on our website and applying directly, or there are people we actively reach out to or are put in contact with by others. We kind of discuss how we could work together through the OGP, and then we ask them to submit an application could be after an introductory call or after we literally just get connected and then have a call after they submit the application. But yeah, regardless, once the application is submitted, Reverie basically reviews it. It's important to note that all of the people on the reviewer committee actually have access to the Airtable with all the application submissions as well. And yeah, Reverie reviews the application, and at that stage, we reject some application if we don't think they're a good fit or we feel they're incomplete. And then if we think there's something interesting there, basically what we'll do is we'll reach out to them on email or Telegram with just a few clarifying questions, either to understand more about their application and their project and their team, and whether we think they have the potential to be grantees. So I'd say that's the first step there. And that usually happens like 2 to 3 weeks after someone submits an application. Sometimes can be much earlier. Sometimes, like I'd say 2 to 3 weeks is really the max, depending on like how many applications we're reviewing in a given moment.
So you said that Reverie reviews them generally in the steps. Reverie reviews them first, but obviously everyone who is a part of the review process can review them at any time when they come in. So what are some criterion, let's say, that would result a grantee to not even pass that first hurdle? Is it generally money? Is it generally the scope of this is already being worked on? Or what's kind of the most common that you come across?
Yeah, I think the most common things that result in a direct rejection is either an application is not relevant to osmosis at all, so it doesn't even make sense for us to engage in a conversation, or like a project has already been worked on or someone's already actively working on it. And in other cases, it's like it's stuff that is not really a high priority for us, and like it's either work we've already funded a lot in the past, and it can also be like the quality of the application itself is pretty bad and like doesn't show the team has put a lot of effort into their application. Of course, if like they provide a link to their project and we think it's outstanding and would be very valuable, we'll still engage. But in most cases, that doesn't happen. And then, yeah, also when like funding requests are way too high and are not justified, that's definitely like red flag for us. Doesn't mean like we'll rule out their application necessarily, because we can always negotiate the funding amount.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's a combination of all those things, and like maybe if they just do one of them wrong, or that doesn't immediately disqualify them. But yeah, if there are multiple of those signals, then we typically reject the applications.
All right. I noticed that you mentioned high priority, and my question to that would be, well, what is considered high priority? Who helps determine those high priority things, and um, do those goals and priorities shift rapidly from, say, what is talked about in a proposal as, justification for funding the grants program, and, what's happening day to day? Obviously, while just this audience alone shows how deep the bear market has gotten. However, the people are still building. People are still trying to iterate, and that means that ideas are actually still changing rather rapidly. So kind of, what's the process around determining priority, and do you work with the multi-sig on what they feel is a priority for the ecosystem as well?
Yeah, definitely. So we've actually recently conducted a bunch of stakeholder interviews from people on the multi-sig, people in the community, and also people on the osmosis team to try and understand what they think the priorities we should be going after are. And that also informs like our grant strategy. If something is really high priority, then we'll like go out and actively try to find people to work on certain projects or put out certain RFPs and stuff like that. But I'd say there are also things that, like, especially given recent market conditions and the value of the grants treasury has gone down significantly due to the recent price action of the Osmo token. There are certain projects that we're not really focused on funding right now, like certain specific categories, unless they're very high quality applicants. And this is mainly stuff like analytics, for example, which we don't feel really moves the needle at the moment. And yeah, we should really be focusing on other stuff. Although like they could be somewhat useful, we feel other projects could be much more valuable, so we'd rather focus our time there.
All right. Robo, as part of the review committee and part of the multi-sig, what kind of process do you see and participate in when regarding the priorities, and what was your take on this the interview process with stakeholders Reverie wanted to do?
Sure, yeah. So just I guess starting from the beginning of like when we get a hold of it, like Federico mentioned, we all have access to this Airtable that has a list of like the applications, and like project descriptions and things like that. Some of us do look at that. I'm sure some of us don't. But the main core process that we participate in is once Reverie has kind of like diluted this huge list down into like a a concrete set of grants that they are recommending move to the next stage for approval. They will submit a Google form to the multisig with details on each grantee, what they're looking to fund, relevant links, to the various projects, information on the team, things like that. Like basically everything that we need to be able to make a informed evaluation of the grantee, the prospective grantee. The Airtable, I personally find the Airtable kind of useful here because we get to see the difference between the submitted application and what's being presented to us, which is always kind of like very interesting for me to see, because you can see like, an applicant may have asked for an exorbitant amount of money, and that is not the final number that's presented to us. So you kind of get to see, and I think this is one of the areas that doesn't get highlighted enough, is just how effective Reverie is at negotiating these grants and sort of acting as advocates for the community, right? They don't just take that first number and say, okay, that's what we're recommending be paid here. They really, really do their best to try to negotiate on behalf of the osmosis community and make the spends as reasonable as possible. So at that point, we get the opportunity to ask questions, which happens very frequently. We want clarification on one thing or another, and oftentimes, Reverie will usually have the answers to those questions right away. But in the event that they don't, they can go back to the applicant, get clarification. Sometimes we'll even hop on calls if that's what one or more members of the review committee want to do. And ultimately, based on all of that, we will make a funding decision in the form that is sent to us, either approved or rejected. And each member of the review committee fills out this form, and then it's majority rule from there.
Nice. So you mentioned about, kind of Reverie's negotiating power when it comes to cost of some of these grants. I'm sure that you've gotten plenty of unreasonable asks or what look like unreasonable asks. Federico, could you talk on what kind of wheeling and dealing you have to do with potential grantees to get them to a number that is sustainable not only for the program but just in general?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, as applications come in, can imagine, we get a lot of like high requests. And I'd say, like, going back to the review process, like after we get these applications and we send out these questions and we see how applicants respond to our questions, they're first targeted to understand like more about the project, and second to kind of like understand their abilities as a team, even if it's like stuff we already know. We want to see how the applicants think for themselves, and how they respond to these questions. After that happens, we hop on a call basically to discuss the project. It's kind of like an interview format. And I think that's really where like we get a really good sense on whether this is like an applicant we'd like to move forward with or not, depending on how the call goes. And if it goes well, what we'll do is we'll keep asking them a number of questions, ask them for clarifications on their funding asks. Like if they have a very high funding ask, we'll ask them to like break down why they need that funding, how they're going to spend it, all this kind of stuff. And I'd say this is not limited to the specific funding request, but also to the scope of the project, right? So maybe in the initial application, we thought the scope was too large or too small, and we wanted them to work on other things as well and add to the grant. And that's something we'll chat to them about to see if it's possible. And then basically what we'll do is explain our reasoning if we think the grant ask is too high, and explain to them why we think it's worth this much to us, and like explain how, we separate these grants in separate milestones, which when hit, result in these payments to them. So that's kind of what we do. And then, yeah, it's basic negotiation, and maybe they'll come back to us with a lower number, but we're still not happy with it. So if it's a project we really want to work with, then we'll offer a slightly higher amount than what we initially presented to them. And then once there's agreement on both sides, that's when we move forward and present the grant to the multi-sig or the review committee.
All right. So the review committee, if this is probably more for Robo, what happens when, the review committee then looks at a grant proposal that has either been whittled down or gone through the process and Reverie feels really good about, but then the review committee goes, no.
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately it bears remembering, right? The review committee is also the group that are the 7 signers on the multi-sig that controls the money, right? So no grant can get through without approval by the review committee. That being said, Reverie is usually pretty good about vetting prospective grantees in advance. There are a couple of like I would say, there was one grant recently that I voted no on, but usually I feel pretty aligned with the grantees and the asks that are put through. But ultimately, if 4 people vote no, the grant won't go through, and then I would imagine the process doesn't necessarily have to stop there. Reverie could go back and renegotiate the grant, or the grant could just, I guess, die right there on the spot. So it's ultimately the multi-sig has the final say.
So what I find interesting is that oftentimes a lot of this is going on behind the scenes. Obviously, having everything on chain or outwardly will slow down the process, especially when you have a given amount of money and, not a lot of time sometimes. So, what in the process of accepting or rejecting uh, proposals that come for funding that come down, if there's a rejection, besides telling the people related to the project directly, what kind of feedback system do you have for the rest of the community to ensure that they're informed of what has been asked of and the reasons as to why?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to take that one. So I think, like as Robo said, if a grant is rejected by the multisig, doesn't necessarily mean the grant itself will be rejected, like the team. We can always go back, renegotiate, share the concerns that were brought up by the reviewer committee, and then maybe agree to a better figure or a better scope as well, and then present it to the multisig again. Sometimes there are projects that the reviewer committee shares very good reasoning, and like we understand why this is not something they'd be willing to fund. And basically, what we do is we go back to the applicant and explain to them the reasoning as transparently as possible, so they're aware of why their application was rejected.
And what about the community aspect of it?
Yeah, so I think, to be fair to the applicants themselves, unless they wanted to be shared publicly why they were rejected, I think it makes sense to keep it private between us. Maybe they shared some things they don't want to be public, and like it's also not a great look on them maybe if they got rejected. And for us to state that publicly, because that may encourage less applications towards the grants program. So we don't really share any public communication on why specific grants were rejected, unless like people want us to share it publicly, and then at that point we will address it publicly. But otherwise, the main thing we do is like share more details about the approved grants and why they were approved, and share regular updates on that through monthly transparency reports and Twitter Spaces, our Discord channel, and stuff like that.
Yeah, and just to add to that, right? I think that also goes into sort of like a broader conversation about transparency. And this is one of the areas that I think that the OGP in this recent cycle has really like stepped up efforts, and that's kind of made itself apparent. There are, like Federico said, monthly transparency reports. OGP holds a monthly office hours here in Discord, where basically anyone can come and ask any question that they want of Reverie, who's usually there. Sometimes a member or two of the review committee will jump on as well. They do grantee update Twitter Spaces. And then, ultimately the review committee itself is also composed of individuals from the osmosis community that are, whose purpose there is to kind of help keep spending accountable and responsible.
Excellent. So, speaking of the review committee, who, besides yourself, Robo, is on the review committee, and what is the general guidelines for being a part of the review committee, and how often does that multisig change?
Yeah, so as far as guidelines, I don't know specifically that there are any. Like the current review committee is composed of people that are just very closely connected with the osmosis community, a group of people that care more, that care about osmosis about as much as anyone can, right? It's as far as like the individual members themselves, I'm one of those people on the review committee. Cold Chain is also here from the OSL. He is on the review committee as well. We have people from prominent stakeholders that have a lot of involvement in the community, like Cosmo Station, Figment, Monet Supply, another independent community member, as well as Brandon Curtis, are all on the committee. To my knowledge, the multi-sig has only changed once. Is that right, Federico?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right. And I think like when we pick new multi-sig members, what we'll do is like try and chat to people in the community, see who they recommend to be on the multi-sig, and people that I think the main requirement here is like being highly involved with the osmosis community and having good understanding of the osmosis platform and product. And the second thing is experience with signing multi-sig transactions, because that's not super easy to do, especially because in Cosmos right now, at least we do it all through the CLI. So there are some technical requirements there. And then it's also people, they're managing high number of funds, right? In the millions of dollars. So we want to make sure that they're able to do that, basically.
All right. Thank you, guys. So something that I've noticed is that there are definitely grants that have been withdrawn, and I wanted to just get a little bit more information. What are some notable reasons beyond, just like technology finally catching up, or another solution comes along that is faster, cheaper, or already mostly complete? What are some reasons that grants have ultimately been withdrawn after either an initial payout or even before an initial payout?
Oh, so you mean like discontinued grants?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of reasons there. I think the main one is one, maybe they weren't incentivized enough to complete the projects. Like sometimes maybe it's our fault. We negotiate so much that like the funding they'd receive by completing the project is not enough compared to the work required. So they may sometimes focus on other projects that are better use of their time. So that happens more rarely. I think the main reason is either they weren't able to complete the project because of their technical ability, or they don't have enough funds or runway to keep working on the project and keep paying their team. In that case, sometimes we'll negotiate a follow-on grant to maybe like sustain them. But if they can't complete the project with the funding we provide, then I think usually it's unlikely they will, even if we give them more funding, right? Yeah, so there are a number of things, but yeah.
Yeah, just to tack on to that, I think it does bear remembering as well as sometimes giving out these grants is almost akin to like investing in, seed funding in like early stage startups, right? Like the projects they need grants like this to get off the ground and even start working. And I know, I'm not super familiar with that world myself, but I know that a lot of these projects, a lot of projects just don't make it. A lot of startups just don't make it. And so a little bit of churn like this is to be expected, and that can be minimized with proper vetting and things like that, which I feel Reverie is super good at doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense completely. So let's say let's walk through the process a little bit more. You know, Reverie has brought the grant to you guys to sign. You say, "Yep, that sounds like a good plan," and you know the initial payment is paid out. What sort of processes and systems does the grants program and Reverie have in place to check in, follow up, to try and keep the project moving? As you know, again, like you said, that there we're essentially seed funding a startup, and it is considered, community money, let's say, and therefore asking about return on investment or just return on the thing that they're working on is kind of paramount in my opinion, and I think in many people's opinion. So what kind of systems are in place for that, and what have you learned from potential failures of the past to work in the future?
Yeah, definitely. I think like the next step after a grant is approved, like of course after their KYC, then they receive their initial upfront payment. We'll always set up some sort of communication channel with the grantee, whether it's on Slack or on Telegram, and we'll regularly follow up with all grantees, at least all active grantees who are working on projects, to check in on their progress, see if they're stuck on anything, if we can help with anything. And then when they complete certain milestones, we'll review them and give them feedback. If we are not happy with something in specific, then we'll tell them like what it is, why we're not happy with it, and how we think they should change it. And just, are in constant communication with all of these grantees to ensure they complete their projects. And sometimes, there are certain grants that are very relevant to the work the core team is doing as well. So we'll put them in touch with the core team, make sure they have a communication channel with them as well if they encounter any like technical difficulties or if they need the core team's input on anything.
All right. So you're saying that Reverie mostly takes care of that end of things. Once the money is approved, the multisig is pretty much just moving on to the next approval to make, right?
Yes, although like certain times the multisig will have specific questions about certain grants and ask us what's going on there. Are they blocked on anything? Why they did a certain action or stuff like that? And in that case, we'll answer all of the multi-sig questions. And if they'd like, we always offer to add them to a Telegram channel with them, put them directly in contact with the grantees, and like they can schedule calls with them, chat with them directly, and so I'd say the multi-sig is pretty involved there as well.
Yeah, I was gonna unmute to basically say the same thing. There have been times where we've gone back and chatted with grantees after the fact. So we still try to stay abreast of grants that are in the process of building. But Reverie is I would say like the primary point of contact for follow up and accountability for those grantees.
So with that, how closely do you try to work with like DAOs or organizations that come across looking for grants, and what kind of scope and help can Reverie ultimately help them with in their ventures? And feel free, if it's easier, to give a specific example or a kind of like example, then go ahead. But I'm just kind of curious.
So by DAOs, do you mean like applications deploying on osmosis, or like other funding programs from other organizations?
I would say any sort of decentralized or a already established unit of people that work together for a common good, operating as an organization, coming to osmosis grants for a funding request to most likely either build something or build out information for osmosis.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm not sure how that's different to like a regular grantee. Sometimes we do deal with DAOs, like they usually sent in specific representatives from their organization. And I think the process is pretty similar from other grantees. But we do like advise them on like if after they've been approved for a grant, part of the follow-up process is like we do always advise them on specific strategy and what we think they should be doing, and like give them advice maybe on token launches and distribution, and like help them get users and this kind of stuff. But yeah, I'm not exactly sure how a DAO should be treated differently from a regular applicant.
Okay. Just a curiosity question that I have written down. The ultimately, the grants program, and we have a few more questions, but that I would love to get to. But there are also some questions like the grants program, at least from a visual community standpoint, has been a slightly contentious topic by certain louder, outspoken members of our community. We all know who they are. We're not going to name names, Marlon. But and I only say that because he's outspoken about anything that comes out of the community pool. And I obviously with Reverie's last vote, it was a year-long proposal, which means coming soon-ish in the next 6-ish months, maybe. There's probably going to be another proposal for another lump sum, but how does Reverie handle the kind of community pushback that they might get when it comes to running a grants program? Obviously, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Osmosis is not the only grants type program that Reverie kind of facilitates or watches over. So what's your experience in other ecosystems as compared to the Cosmos?
Yeah, so um, specifically how we deal with community pushback, I think like the main thing is we're always learning as well. Like there haven't been grants programs being run over the past 20, 30 years that there's a playbook you can just follow. So we're definitely learning as we go. And the main thing when there's community pushback, we're always open to feedback and to questions and coming on discussions like this or holding Twitter spaces or answering people in Discord in the forums, trying to explain our reasoning to them. I think a big reason why the vote was a little bit contentious back in December was because the community thought we weren't communicating enough or being transparent enough. That was definitely a big learning point for us. So we put a lot more effort into transparency and communication to try and keep everyone up to date on what's going on the progress of grantees, on how the funds are being spent, both in funding grantees and funding operational expenses. So everyone has a clearer picture of what's going on behind the scenes, which I feel was maybe missing from the community in the first iteration of the grants program. So that definitely went a long way. And of course, we can't always make everyone in the community happy. Like, there will be some disagreements between us and specific community members, and what we can do is explain our reasoning to the best of our ability on why we made a certain decision. And hopefully they understand where we're coming from as well. That's not to say we haven't made mistakes in the past, but we keep learning from these mistakes and improving the program overall. And specifically from other grants programs, like personally, I wouldn't know because I only work on the Osmosis grants program. But Reverie is running another grants program. The only other one is actually DYDX, which is right now in Ethereum, but they're transitioning over to Cosmos soon. And
soon for the last year, yes.
Yeah, that's right.
As everything is.
Hopefully by the end of the year.
Yeah. No, I completely understand where you're coming from, especially when it comes to the transparency bit. Robo can speak to this, I'm sure, but I can also speak to this, that when it comes to the OSL, we also kind of ran up against that wall of trying to parse out the type of transparency that we can give in the easiest way possible, that will satisfy most questions. And fortunately, I think that when it comes to the OSL, proof is in the pudding. Even during this terrible bear market, we're still making sure that the spaces aren't flooded with, bots, and questions are still getting answered and everything to that nature. So I completely get that. But with that, let's talk about the future. What is the vision? What is the combined vision that, all the people kind of touching the grants program envision Osmosis evolving over the next couple of years, 3, 4, 5 years? And what do you think, like, the ideal end state would be? Because you can't, truthfully, you can keep iterating as much as you want, but when you're working in the idea of, scoping the chain, how does grants contribute to scoping the chain differently than, let's say, the founder or the original dev team? How does it ultimately scope, and where do you see everything in the next few years?
Yeah, sure. So that's right. Like, there's the core team that works on a specific set of issues or features, and then we are really there to support the core team and the community. And so we speak to the core team on a regular basis to discuss strategy and this kind of stuff, and try to understand like what their roadmap is specifically over the next few years, what they want to build internally, what they could potentially like outsource to the grants program to accelerate the development on certain things. And then there are also initiatives we work on which are more community focused and have less to do with the core team as well. So I'd say it's a mix of things. But yeah, I see like the grants program will keep being really important to help Osmosis allocate its own treasury for growth and invest in projects that generate significant return over time, and that serve to basically work towards the vision of the core team, but also the vision of the community.
So I have a question there then. So you regularly talking with the core team is kind of a necessity when it comes to trying to figure out what they feel should be on chain, let's say, to use a easy turn of phrase, to be what kind of applications and other types of services or whatever built on top of Osmosis might be that they might not necessarily have the time, will, or energy to do. And with that, supporting the core dev team in that regards is absolutely great. And I think I remember you mentioning at the start that it was actually the core team of Osmosis that reached out to Reverie ultimately to put up a proposal. So with that kind of in mind, how does Reverie kind of facilitate or work out like their duty to the community as community pool funding receivers versus what sounds like a duty to the foundation?
Yeah. So I'd say like our chatting with the core team is not only about like understanding what their strategy is and what they want to outsource to the grants program. Like there's definitely a part of that, and we'll always try and see how we can help them out. But it's also like us coming out with our own ideas after speaking with the community, with stakeholders, with validators and stuff like that. We have built a lot of important relationship in the community, which people we constantly chat with to get their opinions, and that also informs a lot of our personal strategy. But being in regular contact with the core team also helps in terms of like, if we want to fund something, we want to make sure the core team is not working on it as well, because we don't want to double fund the same initiatives, right? Because that would be a waste of resources, a waste of funds, etc. So it's really also about, like, it's happened before, like sometimes we've gone pretty far with a specific grantee, and then like the core team has told us, no, you shouldn't fund them because we're basically done building this. So like there's no point in you doing that, right? So we want to avoid these kinds of issues as well. So that's also why it's important for us to be in contact with the core team. But I wouldn't say like we only do what the core team tells us to do, or like it's happened many times that the core team wanted to fund a project or wanted us to work on something, and we told them why we thought it wasn't a good idea. Or like after vetting the team, we told them we don't think this is a high quality team and it's not a team we want to work with. So I think it really goes both ways there.
And that's really great that you can have that kind of relationship. And thank you for that insight. So with there is a lot that we could get into about just a whole bunch of the general politics that also goes on with handing out quote unquote free money for building things. But I kind of want some final thoughts from both of you guys on what do you think the best grant spend has been thus far, and the worst grant spend has been so far, and let's call it either completed grants or partially completed grants but still working.
Yeah, we're happy to go into that. I think like from our perspective, the best grant spend has definitely been the work Skip has done on ProtoRev. I think like Reverie played a large role there to onboard them to the Osmosis community. I actually met with them. I was introduced to them by a friend of mine who was at the hackathon when they were there. They were at the Para hackathon, told me they'd be interested in Osmosis, had our introductory chats. At the start, they were really like, they wanted to build something like Flashbots for Cosmos. And then like the Osmosis team was in disagreement with that because, they have strong opinions on MEV and this kind of stuff. So like at the start, it was quite hard, but we really saw the potential in the Skip team. So it's definitely a team we wanted to work with. So we put a lot of effort into basically making them have a good relationship with the core team and figure something we could all work towards that would make the core team happy, make us happy, be good for Skip's business as well, and be good for the community as well. And I think ProtoRev is a great example. It's because, it's direct ROI for the community, a source of revenue that wasn't existent before. So those are the sort of grants we really seek after. And once a team has performed so well and has already generated a ton of value for the community, then we'll want to keep working with them and on the next iteration of what they could build for the community. So I think Skip is a great example of a big win for the OGP. In terms of like the worst grant we've given out, this one's a little hard. If you're talking about like specific funding amount, I think the grant we gave Void was our biggest misstep.
Ouch.
Not because they weren't a good quality team or anything like that. We thought they were a very high quality team.
They just got wrecked by regulation.
Exactly. Halfway through their project, they got wrecked by regulation. It's not something, honestly, we were expecting.
Right.
Like regulation is really hard to predict. And how the grant was structured, I think it was like 250K total, and 75 we're giving out upfront to help them bootstrap to start working on the project. So that's like obviously funding that wasn't very effective.
Hurt a little bit.
And yeah, but I'm sure if the regulatory environment like that didn't happen, they would have been a great team and have like built a great product on Osmosis. But unfortunately that happened. And yeah, regulatory stuff is definitely something we think a lot more now when giving out grants to like minimize downside risk, basically.
Right. Robo, go ahead.
Yeah, so my answer is I'm going to pick a different one, just for the sake of picking a different one. But I agree that Skip is like by far, I think the most impactful and the most valuable grant that's been given so far. And just to kind of add to everything that Federico said, there's a ton of value in attracting mind share to Osmosis, and this is something that I've been thinking about a lot recently. It's not just the product that Skip has built, but the fact that they are now such an impactful and important contributor to the entire ecosystem, in my opinion, is like worth its weight in gold, right? Like I'd probably go as far as to say like that relationship is going to be more impactful for the Cosmos than the entire size of the grants spend from the community pool. I think that having those types of quality contributors involved in Cosmos and Osmosis specifically are just worth 100 times over what was invested in those relationships. But for the sake of picking an additional one, I have high hopes for the MetaMask snaps and what that will bring to the ecosystem. I'm also particularly fond of the fact that that was done as a collaboration with AADAO, with the Atom Accelerator. I'd like to see more, co-funded grants like this happen in the future. I know that the opportunity doesn't always arise, but I think fostering good relationships between grants programs of different chains helps socialize these ecosystem-wide costs and provides a better ROI and a better value for each individual community. That's another one that I have high hopes for. As far as the worst grant, yeah, again, it's a hard one. I think that I'm not sure. Like I think it's always a shame to see grants that that showed promise, like Void Protocol, um, and that for one reason or another they couldn't follow through, or were only able to like complete half of the grant, or something to that effect. Because I know that a lot of the people on the review committee, and I know Reverie absolutely, who invested all this time and resources into vetting these grantees. To have something exciting for osmosis just kind of like fall through or not reach fruition is a little disappointing and frustrating as a member of the community. So I think that's really the best answer I can give to that question.
Yeah, definitely. And I definitely agree. There are grantees that have come out of the gate swinging, let's say, and there are some that have. We all still question where they have disappeared to, and that's going to happen with any grants program and any sort of program that is looking to actually build good in this environment. And to your point, Robo, I definitely agree that cross grant programs, cross community funding should be looked at as the next phase in collaboration for the entire ecosystem, and realistically setting expectations and like proposal asks or funding amount asks to legitimately not just say, hey, we're asking this amount, but hey, we're asking this total amount, but if this goes through, then we're actually going to be only putting up the proposal for this amount or the grant for this amount, and having that be out in the open as a potential funding thing for anything really in this ecosystem might be a good and viable way to get funding for people in this really, really bearish market.
Yeah. And like funding these community-wide initiatives is definitely something we've been trying to spearhead through the OGP. Like we've already done a couple now with mesh security. We worked with a bunch of different chains and communities in the ecosystem to try and push this forward. Same thing with the MetaMask grant, working with the AA DAO. I think before like these kind of grants, I don't know of like the community working together like that. Mm-hmm. And that's definitely something we'd like to do more of, because like the funding power of the Cosmos community as a whole is much more powerful, and the downside to each individual community is much lower when we structure grants like that. Mm-hmm. So when it makes sense and when there are certain really high impact initiatives that benefit the community as a whole, that's definitely the approach we'd like to take going forward, and we want to do more of that.
So when are we getting the DAO of all of the grants programs working together?
Yeah.
I
mean, if you do every single grant that way, it definitely reduces a ton of overhead, because you have so many different people to coordinate with, which makes it hard. So that's not the kind of thing we want to do with all of our grants, but definitely these more impactful ones make a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we are at time, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to thank everyone for joining us who stuck around. Oh, that was my head into my microphone. Sorry, friends. So Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Frederico, Robo, where can people find you? Where can people find out more information about grants? The whole nine.
Sure. So you can find more about grants on our website. It's grants.osmosis.zone. There's a bunch of information there. You can go through all of our blog posts to keep up to date on the latest information. There's a lot of specific information on each grant we gave out, including like project details, funding amounts, all this kind of stuff. There are links to our specific multi-sigs, so you can track our spending. And then, like, of course, the Osmosis Grants Twitter account, and then we also have Grants channel in Discord where we're in there regularly for anyone who has any specific questions they'd like us to address. And yeah, please do join these kinds of calls. We have our monthly office hours and Twitter spaces with grantees where we encourage people to attend and just ask us any questions or give us feedback or share some ideas maybe they have on what they think we should be looking at or funding, and we can be more than happy to dig in there.
Thank you. Robo?
Yeah, so you can find me here in Discord, honestly, the most frequently. Feel free to ping me anytime here. Happy to chat about grants or about random degen stuff. You can find me in the trading dungeon.
Or you can find him in Stride, the Stride Discord.
Yeah, you'll find me in the Stride Discord as well. Or on Twitter at RoboMagobo, same handle as here. Always happy to chat with anyone in the community, and just I really enjoy meeting people, so please feel free to chat at me anytime.
And thank you again, guys. It was a pleasure. And thanks for getting into the nitty gritty. If you have any questions for the OSL, obviously open up a ticket or ping us anywhere here in the Discord. You can also find us on Osmo Support Lab on Twitter and also Osmosis CC on Twitter. You can also read the community updates blog in which we put a synopsis and a review and a transcription of each one of these episodes. We are doing updates from the lab again, transcriptions and reviews, and also you can find out regular information on what's going on the governance forums there as well as a whole bunch of information. Sometimes you will see even Robo writing there, even though he's not a part of the OSL anymore. But yeah, have a wonderful day, friends. If it is your weekend, happy Friday and have a great weekend.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.